you, Arlen, for that introduction, and it's great to see everybody. We're really, really excited to be here. We think this is an incredibly important topic. I'll just say it briefly for the folks who haven't Googled this yet. The Center for a Collaborative Classroom is a nonprofit organization. We work with schools and districts all around the country, really helping students grow as readers and writers and thinkers as they develop the social and emotional skills they need to really thrive. And so we think deeply about the integration of academic and social development. We do lots of professional development around that work, and also develop curricula for schools to use to support that as well. And I'm pleased to have my colleagues with me, Gina and Marisa and myself. And I am really, really happy to have Chris Belmont. Chris is in one of our partner districts in Burnsville, Minnesota. Chris is the principal of Gideon Pond Elementary School. And we're super excited to have Chris here today. So thank my panelists for coming and talking with me. And I'll just say a little bit up front. I'm going to frame the discussion so that then we can dig into the work a little bit and share a little bit of our thinking. So what we learned, and we certainly want to hear from Chris what he's doing in his school, because we certainly learned a lot from Chris and his work throughout this time specifically, but also over the last few years. So when I look at this topic, I'm sort of struck, especially because we sort of designed this to think about for leaders. And being a leader right now of a school, I think, is a really, really challenging, almost impossible task. Gina and I actually just recently did a Facebook Live session for teachers thinking about how to build and maintain their classroom communities. But I don't think there's been a lot of work done nationally around the idea of what does it mean to be a school community during this time? What does it mean to be a student in a school? What does it mean to be a teacher in a school? What does it mean to be leading a school when don't have the building of the school is not where we're grounded anymore? And so it's really that idea, this thinking of how do we maintain that sense of connectedness? We recognize that a sense of connectedness is vital to our success, to our ability to thrive. Kids, if we think just to boil down to the idea of this is so hard for kids in multiple ways. But one of the things I think that gets also overlooked a little bit is that it's so much, if kids are going to thrive right now in this climate of sort of sitting at home and doing this work, is relying upon their willingness to engage and of course, their ability to engage. And those aren't necessarily connected, right? Because some kids really want to connect and really want to engage, but don't have access. But barring that, we also recognize that kids are going to have to do the work, and this is hard work. It's hard to do alone. It's hard to do when you just get a little bit of time with your teacher. It's hard to do in a new environment. It's hard to do when you're stressed. And that engagement really comes from a sense of connection. That the birthplace of engagement is really a sense of connection. And so we can't do enough work really to help our kids do the work they need to be able to thrive, and making it, maintaining a sense of connection is important to that. And that's why I was so excited really to think and have a school leader with us, because Chris, I know you've probably thought about this a lot, and maybe before we even just jump into like some of the stuff you'd probably prepared to say, I would love to hear you just share a little bit about what is it like how do you think about yourself and your role now in this sort of virtual environment as you try to support your teachers and your students and your families, and how do you think about it? How has it changed, and how do you think about that in this current context?
Thanks, Peter. I mean, I'd say that everything has changed and nothing has changed in some ways. My role to help cheerlead and create connections amongst the adults, students, and families in our community, to communicate, and then to both remind us of our promises to our students and families, and also problem solve if we're running into conflict or friction with that. That hasn't changed. The dynamics are different. The amount of steps on my Garmin watch has gone down. I have to get more creative with that, and the demand looks different. And like you said, the need for engagements remains. And, you know, so it's tended to be just reappropriating energy and thought in different ways, but
Mhm.
those basic tenets remain. And then I want a disclaimer that I don't work for the nonprofit group of Center for the Collaborative Classroom, but the work we have done for the last 3+ years in creating routines, relationships, and that feeling of relentlessness and equity is the reason we're having the success we are. It really hasn't been. I mean, we've made some great strategic decisions since March 13th, but there's no way that that's carrying us right now. Because this isn't, I'll also name that this is not the best way to educate children,
Yeah,
period.
yeah.
So we know that.
Well, you said something just a second ago, Chris, that I think is so important to remember. And I think it's this idea that your ability to be successful right now is predicated on the hard work you did during the year when you were together. And when you were, so that, one of the things I often talk when I'm with schools now and doing and collaborating with them is, if teachers didn't build or have a strong sense of connection with kids before we switched to distance learning and had to go home and shelter in place, it's really hard to build that relationship now. We can do the work to maintain it, and we can try to continue to reconnect, but it's really hard to start from ground zero. And my guess is the teachers that are struggling the most were the ones that were struggling, to maintain those relationships before this even started.
Yeah, I mean, I'd for sure say that some strengths, some brilliance that some staff members maybe had below the surface have really emerged in profound ways through this. However, the just what you said, the work of relationship building that had occurred well before March 13th is the only way we would be overcoming barriers at the rate we are. So, like, to be a school that's 60% free lunch, 70% students of color, transient, we turn over our population about 30% each year. I don't say those to paint a deficit or challenge or heroic light on things. I'm just saying those are barriers that we traditionally associate with low engagement or challenge. Um,
Mhm.
I paint that picture because our data since March 13th looks very different and less predictable. Um, the fact that we got devices in the hands of all 512 kids in 3 days or 4 days or whatever it was seems like an eternity ago. The fact that our average daily attendance is 97%, that knowing the stories of our families and the things that they face, that can only happen with that bedrock of relationships that have been formed and built so strategically over time. And then also just the mindset of the staff working with our families that to push through those barriers.
Um,
They exist again still today, right? We know that it's cyclical and challenges, and as we get deeper into this strange dream, that we know that the barriers can compound. That's what's happening in Minnesota.
Peter, it made me think of this aspect of when Chris said 97% attendance, that importance of connectedness and that willingness that you were speaking to from the student part to, I really want to be connected to my community again. I really want to be a participant in that. And I think that is such a unique way to think about it. For you, Chris, you've been able to get those devices in the hands of students. For others, we've heard various ways of getting on the phone, sending pictures via text message, different things that are engaging students to be connected, whether with the teacher or other students, has been so paramount to this time and this kind of unique learning environment.
Yeah, it's amazing to see things that are happening all across our country because teachers believe in their children and they know that just because a kid has or because a child has barriers that they've faced in their life, they're actually going to be more willing to walk across fire to re-engage in that relationship. They'll do whatever it takes as long as they can have that access.
Mm.
Chris, something you said earlier too about the routines that were already in place. One of the things we've heard really loud and clear is that when teachers are able to engage kids in those same routines again, they're feeling just a sense of comfort. And so we had a couple of teachers really share that they weren't able to do live lessons, but that they're able to touch base, as Gina said, with their kids via phone. And that sense of kind of routine, and I know what to expect because it feels like school, again, with my teacher, has been very comforting for a lot of kids.
Exactly. An engaged student does not present the barriers or the challenges we typically associate with school struggle. And Peter, I've seen your, I've been to your breakout. I don't see behavior challenges in our literacy blocks.
Mm-hmm.
I never do. And sometimes they're extraordinarily long time-wise. And so if we have the routines, Marisa, just like you said, if we have the routines built, if kids know what to expect, if they love that adult that's in front of them, and then they're actively engaged in some type of learning, I think that's been the biggest aha for me through all this is the rigor. And I know rigor gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not talking about layers and layers of stuff piled on top of each other, but the high level of learning that I'm seeing. And we have a fourth grader and a kindergartner at home that attend our school, so I'm watching it from a parent's lens too. I'm impressed, and it's not about hours and hours of screen time. It's just about pretty high levels of rigor that I think were built up over time, well before this. So.
Well, that actually is a good segue, and I'm going to say two things. One, I want to have you think a little bit with us about how we're engaging and attending the students, particularly around issues of access and equity, because I know those are things you've thought a lot about. And I also encourage folks as we're talking that if you have questions or you have comments to definitely use the chat vigorously, and certainly put questions in the, Narlin will read those questions out to us. We're gonna break in just a second and take any questions that have come up. But I'm just wondering, Chris, while folks are doing that, if you might just, I know you've thought about it, and because we've set the stage a little bit. We said, well, if you had a good sense of community before, it can go and you can build on that now. But there are also some things you have done very specifically to think about equity and access, and I'd just love for you to share a little bit about that.
Well, and a disclaimer, and you're talking, Peter, about specifically through this distance learning time period, is that correct?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, one disclaimer is that inequities in our system have been illuminated throughout all of this in a really kind of humbling way, I think, and hopefully a way that we won't ever forget, so we can learn and change some things after. Zaretta Hammond's webinar that I attended on a lot about improving that schema and using word work and really leveraging the strengths that are in our students and families' environments has really helped me as a leader. We've done every other week we do a Zoom with, I think last time we had close to 40 Somali parents, which is our biggest, 45% of our school, that we were having conversations about ways to, or the reasons for independent reading and the reasons for word study. And then we had purchased 40 of the Bananagram games with, right? And so just to give some tangible things that can happen beyond screen time. And I was just brought to tears because not 15 minutes after that webinar with those families, many of whom are learning language at they're behind some of their 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, but they were here picking up that game, and they also understood how they were going to use that game to try to improve the schema and the word knowledge of their children. Pretty profound. Even just to hear some of the ideas they had for each other during that Zoom were incredible. So.
Peter, may I share that we very similar because we recently heard a story about a school community that prior to this COVID time, they had been attaining to adult literacy. So really attaining to the parents at the school site that needed support with adult literacy, using the same routines and procedures that they were using with the students. And now that their children are home, kind of doing that same learning, the parents and the students are now supporting each other. And the parents now have some of those things in their own pocket that they can bring out to help their own child with reading. And I just thought about that kind of what a cyclical approach to not only of the connectedness to the school community, but now my home community can really support and help me too to be a more independent reader. Marisa, I know that we were both touched by that story.
Very much. And it actually was in a Facebook Live, and our community just really rallied around. That was another thing they hadn't quite thought of. Again, right? Like we're all learning from each other so much as we're inventing and innovating right now. And it was just such a really heartwarming piece. And it got wheels turning on how can I involve more families in the process of what's happening right now that is a benefit to both of us along the way.
I think that in addition to that, Marisa, has been this opportunity to also think about, we spend so much time in our school community, ways we want to work together. How do you respect your partner? How do we listen? And bringing some of that home too. Where's the right place for my work environment? When might I get a snack? So also thinking about those opportunities of that kind of parallel community building. What does my community building look like with my family unit? So we can all do our work because, as you said, Chris, you have two kids at home going to school and you're supporting school. And so how does that work as well? And just kind of thinking about things outside of the box that allow that community to continue to build and flourish.
No, I mean, this idea of families as partners is so fundamental right now to our, a school's success, and just recognizing that when they're and then how difficult if there are barriers to connection for families, that we really think through how to reduce them in ways, because if we don't connect with families, we're seeing the real the significant problems, because kids really can't connect if that is a significant barrier in ways that it's one thing if they if a family drops a kid off at the front of school, and the kid comes into the building, but here the drop them off is is a whole different ballgame, especially in how kids are connecting. So thank you for that. Arlen, what kind of questions do we have, if any?
Yes, we've got 3 people have chimed in so far. We've got some great questions and comments. I'll start with Marla. She says, I'm also impressed with what the students have been able to accomplish. We've had students conferencing each other in e-birthday celebration. Churches are connecting with kids through these meetings because it is something that they have already embraced it for schoolwork. Teachers have also encouraged project-based learning and presenting more than rote memorization or short answer assessment.
Arlen, just to pause for a second, I think that's so important, because I think while teachers are getting a lot of, I think, appropriate praise in social media and news, I think they're also getting lots of bashing, because there are lots of for rightful, I know parents feel overwhelmed, and I get it. And I get that certainly there are examples out there probably of work that's not great for kids. But on the whole, I think that we have to recognize the real amount of just hard work and dedication folks are doing, teachers are doing, to create learning experiences for kids in a very unique environment. And often teachers doing this work with tools that are new to them, in a format that's new to them. So they're vulnerable, they're risky. Parents see all their teaching now in a way they don't when the door's closed. I mean, this is a really different time, and I think it takes a lot of support and a lot of encouragement and a lot of community for teachers to be successful doing that. So I just appreciate that comment and recognize that this is super hard work. I mean, I had a couple teachers tell me it's like being, I've been teaching for 30 years and it feels like I'm a new teacher. Like I've never done this before. So what else, Arlen? What else did you discover in the chat?
Angel asks, how do we get all teachers to understand it's about connections and understand this time is about Maslow versus Bloom's? My teachers are awesome and have high expectations. how can I help them to keep that and understand social and emotional students' needs even more now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, Chris, how have you thought about that?
Well, I just, I would make one edit that it's always been about Maslow's over Bloom's. So if students and families don't have their needs met, they're not going to be able to engage what we're doing. So that's another reason that I'm so proud of the fact that we don't have families and students that have completely disconnected or dropped off the radar, because the consequences are beyond learning right now. We're making sure that they have access to food, and another thing that I'm seeing with huge inequities is access to safe physical movement right now. So we know that that's so critical. If I've been fortunate to be raised by great mentors who have reminded me that if we take care of them, if we think about the most fragile members of our community, we will meet the needs of everyone. So I think that just that mindset and approach is so important.
The other thing that comes to mind, and I don't think that folks need necessarily convincing, but I mean the research on this is actually pretty clear too, and I think it's important for teachers to recognize there's a ton of evidence that supports this idea that engagement, meeting kids' basic human needs, developing a sense of autonomy, a sense of belonging, a sense of competence, those things sort of never, they're the fundamental underpinnings of healthy development, and that attending to those things is the work. It's not extra. It's not something I need to do on the side. Like, it is fundamental to the work. And that, yeah, we also are trying to help them develop as mathematicians, and we're trying to help kids develop as readers and writers. And we're helping them connect and thrive. And it isn't one without the other. And I just think sometimes as teachers, we get overwhelmed. We can forget that, because we get laser focused to help kids be successful. And so yeah, I think then another thing you can consider is just helping teachers recognize that this work is really grounded in science and in research, that as well, as probably intuitively good.
Peter, building off of what you said, and what I think is kind of fundamental in Angel's question, is we have to kind of step back and realize our own overwhelmedness, right? And sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed as teachers, then we overcompensate on some things. And so in addition to what you shared, I think another piece is to help teachers step back and kind of recognize, where are my own feelings here? And I think many of us are teaching with children at home, and that presents quite a challenge. And we're going to talk about that in a little while, but really thinking through helping people understand what the other shoe is like, right? So while we become overwhelmed and laser focused, how do we really build that empathetic piece of us and understand what other families are going with, who may not be as laser focused on academics right now, when so many other things have taken priority.
And Marisa, early on, we did a poll, if you might remember, on our Facebook community page, and we were really struck by the fact that we were trying to see, what platform are folks using? What are you thinking about for your time with your kids? And so many people replied to the poll around, we're just looking at food. We're looking at making sure the students have what they need. We're thinking about, how do we make sure that the kids get books that they need? I know, Peter, you've done some book drop-offs yourself as well. And so that, I think it makes me also think about, like, the fact that, when we get into this mode, Marisa, and we're maybe anxious to do what we're supposed to do, that kind of maybe goes to the extreme of this, I got to do all this academic work, but there are steps that can get us to that place and get us to be able to do that. I also think about, Chris, hearing from some of your teachers around the fact that there was a real deliberate, we're going to start here, and then we're going to add this, and later we'll add that. And now we're thinking about writing, so that it was this, let's all kind of get our stamina built for remote learning and getting ready for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because we had so many people that wanted to help, right? We are educators. Everyone wants to make things right and fix things. And so to just give people that grace in that time was not only beneficial for the teachers who ended up just continuing to do such an incredible job with the approach you described, Gina, but also for our students and families to have that same approach, because it can feel overwhelming.
So we've spent some time thinking about sort of the students coming to us and some of the sort of fundamental things they need to be successful, and recognizing some of the things that we can do to really bridge the gaps as much as we can and to help kids stay connected. But the other thing we wanted to talk about today was attending to our staff members, as we sort of touched on a little bit in the last question, but really I was thinking maybe we could spend a little bit of time digging into um, how can we better attend to our staff and ourselves in this time. And I think there's the especially if you're a school leader, I think there's the drive to sort of burn the candle at both ends, to try to sort of be everything, because you're sort of the last backup for everything, and that can be really empowering, and that can be really engaging, and it can give a sense of empowerment from it, but it can also be incredibly debilitating and hard. And so I'm just wondering, Chris, as you think about supporting your teachers first, and then maybe even supporting yourself, just thinking a little bit about how have you thought about that, and what are some of the things you've tried to do with your staff to help them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The again, coming back to like a broken record, the things that occurred before March 13th, so critical to building what we can do, and being a culturally proficient school, seeking school that has been so heavily focused on trying to be vulnerable, introspective, and student and family centered over these years, I think has helped us take the same approach. And I think it does help us compartmentalize. It helps us scaffold. It helps us choose where to put our energy at that given time. But it's not, no, I agree. Teachers are the greatest people on the planet because it's not always easy, and it's complex, it's challenging. So then to add, like you said, so many new tools and resources has been challenging. I'm amazed at the way people have been vulnerable, honest, humble. Tomorrow, I'm sensing that we're at this place of overwhelm, thinking about how we're going to close the school year. So tomorrow for our staff meeting, we are simply going to focus on positive. So you said it, Peter, it's such an exciting time in, like, I don't know, human life, to know that brain research, educational, everything comes back to relationships. I had a teacher, I remember a few months ago from a different school, saying, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. I have a homeless student. I have a student that has family has addiction. I have a student that, I said, oh, the great thing is it doesn't really matter. Relationships are the antidote for every challenge that we face. And so we're going to pause tomorrow and remember the positive things. My two, I mentioned I have a fourth grader and a kindergartner. I've never seen them bond like they have through this because they don't have a choice. I haven't had to wear a tie in 6 weeks. We're going to take advantage of some of those things that are positives. And we've also touched on some of the deeper things we're learning about, maybe the things we put on kids that maybe we didn't have to, or those power struggles we battled all these times when we were doing regular learning, that when we pulled that away, distance learning, we're seeing kids show up in such profound and amazing ways. So I think taking time to activate those parts of our brain has been really important too. And then encouraging, my biggest thing is people that are so focused on time, helping them reinvent that through all this, because you'll never get off the internet. You're always connected if you're not really figuring out a new way to reimagine time. There's students that post at 11:45 at night. There's students that post at whenever, and we have to give ourselves permission to think differently. But go with that.
You know, Chris, as you were talking about the power of pause, it was reminding me of a conversation I was having with a school leader as we were getting ready. You know, March 13th, the world changed. And that is my birthday, by the way. So I always think like this year, my birthday really set the world flame. But I was working with a district leader, a school leader, just that very next week. And we were meeting with a group of teachers, and the teachers were really thinking about basically how to recreate the school day in a distance learning format. And that school leader really said, whoa, 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 wait. Like, we don't need to do that. Number one, we're going to pause. So it's reminding me of that. She said, we're prioritizing morning meetings. So for them, that was their relationship building piece. And she's like, we're going to pick one thing. What's the one thing we think is going to give the biggest bang for our buck right now? We can think about things 2 weeks from now, but right now, what's the one thing? And I think teachers really needed that, in some ways, permission, right? Like, you don't have to try to recreate the school day with tools you've never used before in a pandemic. Like, that's not what we need to be doing right now. But the school leader really led that and gave that release in some ways. And so I just so appreciate you speaking to that need. And I think that many leaders are seeing that as part of their role right now, is to say, you know what, no, it's okay. It's okay that that's not what we're doing, because we're attending to this instead. And there's power in that.
Marisa, you know, that also makes me think of that kind of a continuing a story where the district, the leader and the teachers made one decision that didn't work, and allowing it to be abandoned. You know, this is not working. So what can we do to better meet, to better capture some kids who can go on better at night? And what does that look like because of their daily schedule? And so I think along with that is also being willing to kind of say, okay, this decision wasn't right for our kids right now. Let's make a new one. Let's really examine the practice that helps that come. And it makes me think about the fact that that comes through dialogue as well. And Chris, I know that you've kept that going. You've kept your team meetings, your opportunity for teachers to dialogue with each other, and you as a staple part of the kind of weekly practice that's still happening even in this remote time.
Yes. Yeah. While our, like Marisa, you'd so great example, that while our methods may change, our goals have not. And I would put literacy right there, right near Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need to deliver that for children. So being able to check in, being able to add those scaffolds each week to see what our students and families are capable of, and then make adjustments, be aware, preferably, and not need to. I agree we have to abandon some practices, but any chance we can to not even start the ones that weren't going to work is really beneficial too, for that resisting apathy. And that's what I'm so proud of our staff of. I have not heard one semblance of apathy for any child, any student, any situation through all this. We're going to figure it out. I mentioned 50% of our families practicing Muslims, so we have Ramadan right now too. So that we have to lean into our bicultural, our bilingual staff to help us anticipate the blind spots we might not know before, and then to set up the structures that work for those students and families too right now.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I think one of the biggest things we can learn from this is the humility in just really listening to better to the needs of our communities and our kids. I think, we can't do everything, and we can't pretend that we can recreate the powerful things we were doing in our buildings virtually. We can't do all of that, and especially given the trauma of the climate that we're within, trauma for lots of reasons. Some because kids are at home now and experiencing things to an acute level that they were experiencing a little bit before. And it could be for a variety of, obviously things, for a health crisis and everything. So we recognize that all that's happening in this context, and that maybe the biggest thing we can learn as we go into next year and we come out of this year is that if we can be humble, and we can listen, and we can be ready to acknowledge that kids are developing, they're growing, and they're learning right now. And it's not all the things that we anticipated they would. And it may not be all the skills we are, going to be testing in the fall or next year at some point. But they are learning and they are developing and need things that if we don't watch and if we don't watch our blind spots, we'll miss. And we could do maybe even greater damage if we're not really, really acute to paying close attention to what's really happening for kids. And I know that for us as an organization, one of the things that we're trying to really think about as we work with schools at this time is how can we be better listeners and better partners to schools and districts, but in the schools can be better partners to kids and families. So I appreciate that. And I'm wondering if that makes a good time to pause for just a second to see if there are questions that maybe folks have asked Arlen, and let's pause just for a little bit to see what the folks in the online community want to talk about.
We've had this next question pop up several times and just a few different variations. But the question is, how would you start the fall semester if we're still remote? How would you approach building culture and community?
So I think we've all been starting to think about that, and I know that Marisa and Gina have. And Chris, I'm not sure where you're at as a community, if you're even, if you even started to turn your head there yet. But maybe we'll start to see if there's things that you've thought about or beginning conversations. And then I'd love for Marisa and Gina to chime in because I know they've done a lot of thinking about this. And it's okay to say no, Chris, so you can take a pass because you're running a building right now, and that's not. It's okay to say I don't know that I'm ready to start talking about next year.
It's so strange because the reality seems to shift day to day or week to week, but we're planning contingency plans through next fall. So that seems to be this strange dream we're in. Personally, I'm after 5 years at Gideon Pond, I'm moving to our high school at July 1st to do some leadership there. And so I'm going through a whole different personal grieving process. That's a different webinar topic because I love my job so much and I was really looking forward to these final 3 months. I know there's loss everywhere. But I do share that personal testimony because I do think people are dealing with loss at such different levels and in such different ways that if we are coming back in the fall, with a substantial amount of remote learning, we really need to crank up our dial as far as how we're tuning into what students, families, staff need. I think like has been mentioned by our panelists, relationships must drive our choices. And we really need to think about where the deep roots are for those students and families going into the fall if we're going to have different structures to build those relationships. So that's been our conversations.
Well, Marisa,
yeah, we've been thinking about this a lot and trying not to panic, to be honest, right? Like, this is not a place we thought we would ever be in this idea of starting the year remotely. And I think one of the things that I've heard loud and clear from the teachers and leaders that I've been working with is that they feel like their distance learning has gone so well because they were able to leverage the relationships they built at the beginning. And Chris, you talked about that from the start. So, as an organization, we are thinking about what are our contingency plans for if we're starting remotely? And there have been some national calls around looping. I think that's, something that we may consider as we think about how do we start kids in a familiar place where they feel safe if they're starting in a remote community. I think another thing we're thinking about is, again, there's so many scenarios that we can play out, but if we're able to start together in some semblance of social distancing within a school building, what will we prioritize when we expect we will have to go to remote learning that then we can leverage? And that scenario of kind of starting together in some kind of social distance way, but still physically in the same building, and then how do we leverage that for then moving into remote, more, remote learning like we're all kind of doing now, is another consideration. And I do feel like in some ways we're in a little bit of uncharted territory. I mean, especially, the people who have done ed tech research around building communities, typically have done that with more adult or older learners. And now we're talking about a kindergartner first coming to school, maybe not coming to a school building. So it's definitely stretching our brains as we think about how to build those communities and those relationships so that, you know, to Peter's earlier point, the real learning can occur. We have to have those pieces first. Gina?
It also makes me think of the fact that we had some colleagues who had a chance to try out remote learning with kids they didn't know. And we learned a few things from that experience. One is that really identifying and having dialogue about the ways we work together. What does our online community look like? And not only dialoguing, but having that be a prominent part of every conversation that they have. And also thinking about the fact that when we're on an online platform, there are things we have to think about that are different. How does it feel when we don't mute? How do we use the chat box respectfully? All those things were paramount. And what we heard from those colleagues was that it was really important to be very consistent about that. Continue to delve into, draw attention to across the sessions until that community really settled in. In addition to that, another thing that really caught my attention in this was this opportunity to get to know the kids in ways that maybe we might deem academic per se, through games, through activities, through spotlighting different kids, through various levels of choice. All of these things the teachers reported gave them this opportunity to learn about kids that they didn't know. And frankly, in this case, we're across several time zones and coming together as a community. And so to your point, Marisa, that kind of stepping back and thinking about what do we do differently? You know, I think there are some aspects of, especially if we do have to start remotely, that we might want to consider that first and foremost of what are the aspects that do develop community, get us to learn to know each other, then lead us into the stronger literacy community or the stronger math community that we need to have when we're getting deep into the content.
Go on. Do you want to say something?
No, I just want to make a connection though to a conversation. I have the pleasure of being in some conversations with Chris's teachers because they're my PLC as well. You know, across different time zones. This is another one. And I was also struck by the fact that one thing that the teachers were considering was this opportunity between school years. What are the things we might get in the parents' hands so that they have some resources, not to teach school. We want everybody to have a summer, but that other piece of too, you know, access to some kinds of tech, some kind of writing materials, some kind of tips. I know, Marisa, we've really thought about the kind of everyday reading and writing, everyday play. What are the things that we can really encourage so that you know, students are kind of getting that flavor of engaging in something so that when we come back in the new year, and I was just so taken by that conversation, Chris, and that, you know, just thinking about not just our school year and our kids, but how do we really keep that foster of what summer could look like for kids at home. Sorry, Peter.
No, that's really, I appreciate what all of you said because I'm reminded of something, and that is that that because it's a good thing, because it's a hard thing, there's no magic way to do it. And I think one of the things that we'll see in, you know, coming out is you'll probably get lots of things coming in your email inbox about, you know, just try this one thing. There's just what, you know, the quick solution for, you know, success, virtual success online or building community online. And we know that in fact that we're dealing with real people, and real people are hard and they're complicated. And that developing a real deep sense of connection, if you're starting virtually with a new group of kids, is not easy. There isn't. I think we shouldn't sugarcoat that, because the things that Chris, Marisa, and Gina talked about that are going to be fundamental to building that relationship are hard in person. So they're just going to be harder when they're on, you know, virtually. Things like being consistent and predictable. But we know, particularly kids who experience trauma, need desperately to be in a safe, supportive, predictable environment. That's fundamental to their success, but that's hard to do when we live in a very frantic world. And so teachers need to really work really hard in their virtual space to create a predictable space, predictable things and routines and procedures. Like when we come into our virtual room, what do? Just like when I come in my regular classroom, I know where to put my backpack, I know where to sit, I know exactly where I'm supposed to be. What about my virtual room? How do I take care of myself here? What do I do with my mute button? Is it okay to turn on and off my camera? When is it okay for me to just talk? And when is it important for me to wait my turn? Like those are things we have to learn. And then just this whole idea of the building, the work of building relationships, the calls, the individual meetings, those things are hard in person, but they're equally hard. But they are what's important. They are what's important. So Arlen,
Yeah.
I'm gonna. Do you want to say something, Chris? You want to add on to that?
Oh, I was just going to say how much I am feeling better about the fall after listening to that conversation. And then just thinking about some technical aspects of literacy that could be, I think we could beef up if we had to, is that read aloud, is the IDR and word study, and just trying to help, like you said, Peter, be true, authentic partners to our parents. I think sometimes we think we are the only gatekeepers of education. I know I am guilty of thinking that. And then the thing that I would love to keep partnering with the collaborative classroom on if it comes to it is assessments, because that's where my head hurts a little bit to try to reimagine how to do assessments through this, struggling with that.
Ours too, Chris. Our head
Yes.
hurts.
We're going to try some things out. Reese and I are going to practice because I think it's that hard opportunity to observe students in a camera lens too. And how do we do that? And how do we navigate that? Which can add that another layer of stress that can pause us from moving forward as well as we're trying to do the work.
Yeah, we talked about the importance of, especially when we come back next year, really listening to kids and trying to understand where they're at, not assuming things. That's super hard to do when you start virtually. So, but it's going to be still important. Still important.
Peter, I would like to just linger there for a minute. Maybe speak, if you want to speak to something that you spoke to. I know for me, it's really resonated, is this aspect that we have to really believe in the fact that there's assumptions that students have done a lot during this time. It might not have been our curriculum. It might not have been all the day-to-day learning but there is an aspect of students are learning, they're growing, they're developing, and March till the new school year is quite a long time. And that we do have to bracket maybe some preconceived notions or ideas of who those students might be to really get to know those students.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's the hard part. We're going to hear lots over the next 5 months about learning loss, and it's going to be real. So I'm not going to try to sugarcoat that. But I think what can get lost in that is that we start just blanket making assumptions. That we start, we immediately assume kids are coming in with a massive deficit, and that they haven't really learned anything. And I think that's really dangerous. I think that our kids are growing, they are learning, they are surviving, hopefully, and that to do that, they're learning some really important things. And so I think being really conscious of that and really watching them, we then won't be labeling them right away. We won't be assuming things right away. We'll actually be able to develop hopefully support for them that really meet their needs as opposed to assumed needs. And I also think that when we think there's this learning loss, we only look at those things. We'll have two tools that will assess and will diagnose those things, and we might miss all the other things that both they might need or that they've grown in that would actually support us in that other work. We might just miss it completely if we're not watching for it. And so you talked, Chris, about blind spots. I think we're going to have a lot of blind spots. And I think that's why just trying to be really responsive is going to be really, really important. So thanks for bringing that up, Gina. But I'm sensitive to time, and I just wanted to check with Arlen about on the time and know to see if there are some lingering questions that we need to get at, so we can make sure we meet everyone's needs.
A couple people have asked, is it an option for a teacher to take their class into the next grade level if remote learning continues into the fall, since they already have a relationship built in?
I think that's a real national conversation that's happening right now. I mean, there have been multiple conversations around the idea of looping. I'm even questioning, might they start off and then do a handoff in some way? Might there be other kind of scenarios that we haven't ever considered before because we haven't needed to, that just might allow our entry into a new school year in a remote way a bit more gentle on our students? I know there are challenges around all of those things, though. I don't pretend that any of those decisions are easy.
A question from Kelly: would also love to hear what it looks like to deliver tier 2 and tier 3 instruction online. They have found this very frustrating.
I hate that, Kelly. I'm sorry that you're frustrated. Yeah, Gina, go ahead. We've done a lot.
We recently, I've talked to a lot of educators about this, and we find that there's several different avenues to go about. There is the avenue where using a live format has worked really well. It has provided access to students. One of the interventionists we spoke to talked about even to the families that they had access that they've never had before. And so that those lessons and that learning has been really effective as they learn the platform, Peter, as you said, as they learn camera angles, especially doing some phonics work, being able to see the mouth and being able to hear the student read as well. But there was a lot of folks that we heard that was not reasonable, accessible, or even successful. And so we've heard some folks that have gone to a couple of different ways. One would be using some recorded opportunities. So the students are doing some learning. I was really struck by the intervention you shared. We recorded the lessons and the kids can watch them when it worked for them. And they found this great engagement around that. And then this teacher set up these check-in times. And in some cases, it was on a live platform. Some cases, it was a phone call. Sometimes it was a picture being sent by text. And I remember one interventionist sharing the fact that on the days where they knew they were going to get a phone call in this case, the kids really rose to that occasion. You know, they were kind of more, the parents were reporting more maybe engaged in that learning because they knew they got to share it with the teacher that day. We also heard from folks who had to think very differently around access. And so one thing, this is the last tip I'll give Peter, but the one thing that really struck us was a district that was using flash drives because the parents didn't have necessarily the technology, but some did have this access to flash drives where they could get some materials into the hands of families in that way. And so I think it's not necessarily about one approach, but it's what's the right approach for the students you're working with. And even in some districts, it's been multiple approaches for the varying students that are in their community.
And just to add to that flash drive, what I found was amazing is they were just loading those flash drives with the recorded lessons. So no internet access was necessary, and they were being able to deliver those to families, which was just a really smart idea. What other questions come up, Arlen?
We've got one from Megan. It says, when you have families that are disconnected from their own students' schooling, how do you bridge the gap for those kids, especially in high school? In school, having a connected relationship enabled me to help challenge these students and buy into their academic success. But since moving to remote learning, they are checked out.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Chris is going to high school, so maybe he has some ideas about this and or knows what the high school is doing and that he's going to. But I do know from the high school teachers that I've interacted with that this is a big issue, right? I mean, getting because engagement, you know, kids have to opt in. They don't show up, they don't show up. I mean, it's way easier for them not to show up now than it was ever. And so. Again, there is no magic, easy way to do this. The teachers that I've seen that had the most success have done the most sort of old school analog thing. They called all their kids. That was it. The few that I know that have had success from getting, like, one started, they only had 20% of their class of the students in the multiple classes that they taught as an English teacher, but got their was able to find the kids, and it wasn't always easy to find them, by the way, right? The school numbers weren't always the numbers where the kids were, where they were quarantining. And then of course now many kids have cell phones, and so they, you know, trying to find them. But after about 3 weeks, after he was able to contact all his kids, you know, he had something like 90% of his kids were able to come in, and he had regular contact with. It doesn't mean they're there every day, but he had regular contact with and felt like they were getting some support. So I guess, you know, this isn't the best environment for, I mean, I've got a 17-year-old in the next room over here doing school. I hope. I don't really know because I'm on this webinar. She can be doing whatever she wants. But the fact of the matter is that you know, she has to really want to do it if she's going to do it, because it's super hard. It's hard to do this work remotely. It's hard, and the content is hard. And so you know, that sense of connection is, but it's also fundamentally important. I mean, she needs it. She needs it more now, maybe more than ever. So I don't know. That's another way of, so we're sort of ending this on the same way we started, but it's this idea that I think that in the end, especially for high school kids, it is going to be the kids that are most connected to their school and to their teacher that probably end up staying the most engaged. And by the way, there's two bad things about it. There's some good things about it. One, that's valid in the research, so we know that's true. But the other thing is the kids that tend to feel most disconnected are our most underserved. And they tend to be students of color, and they tend to be families that we are underrepresented in our communities, in our school communities. And so I think this is a real challenge. This is a real challenge for us as we think about going forward, because those kids that need this the most are often the most disconnected. And we're the reason in many ways they're the most disconnected. So this is a challenge. I mean, this is really, really hard. And so I think that, but it's important and good work. So what, you know, we're at the end of our time here. I'm curious, Chris or Gina or Marisa, if you have any final sort of comments you might want to share with the community before we go our merry way.
I might say that I think that one of the important things is I think we've talked around this several times, is that knowing your community, knowing your students, knowing the teachers you work with, knowing what your families, and being flexible around that. And it might look different in different scenarios, and it might, but also what are the things that are true? What are true about our community always, and how do we carry that forward? And I think it's hard. I think no matter how many great suggestions or scenarios we shared, they're still hard. Risa?
I'm just grateful for this conversation, and I really appreciate all the brain power that was put in. I thank so much to the community that was here in this chat, kind of asking questions along the way, and we'd love to continue the conversation. We are happy to share the resources we've come up with along the way if they're helpful to you in any way.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'm sorry, I'll let you go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to echo what Marisa said. No matter how many encouraging results you get, there's always something, and there's always doubt in the back of our minds. So I'm just appreciative of a chance to talk about relational momentum and adaptive accountability, and kind of that whatever it takes mindset to reaching and our families, meeting them where they're at. So I'm grateful. Makes me better being with you all. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I appreciate all that you've shared from the team there. I just wanted to let our participants know, if you would like somebody from the Center for the Collaborative Classroom to follow up with you, type yes into the questions box now, and we will make sure that they get your contact information. And just a reminder that this was recorded. It'll be archived on the Ed Leaders Network website, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording and an evaluation to you probably tomorrow morning. The recording should be ready.
Well, thank you to everyone. Yeah. Thanks my colleagues here, and thanks Arlen for the opportunity to continue the conversation.
It was my pleasure. Appreciate having the whole team here. This is a great discussion, and thank you so much to our attendees for the valuable questions. That was really helped guide the conversation. Very much appreciated. You are free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the session for today. I hope everybody takes care of themselves and takes care of each other, and we'll see what next school year brings. Thank you.